you're watching this, please hit that like button. There may be interruptions in between. I don't know. The live stream might get cut out. And also it could be because I'm getting so many calls and I'm sort of overwhelmed at the moment. And I've been trying to get on here at some point to give people an update on what's happening. So many requests, like I said, but I've just been 24/7 reporting, and it's been a bit hectic. So I want to give a rundown to people as to what has occurred today over the past few days, um, how we got to this point, the context behind it, and then we're going to go into analysis. And we might jump into analysis in between. Forgive me if I'm extremely tired. There's been no sleep recently covering these events, and people very close to me have been affected. So, just a little bit off of it at the moment. So, what has happened today? Well, to begin with today, you may have heard of the massive rocket fire into Tel Aviv. And this is going to go into a little bit of an opinion as well. And for people who have been watching this channel, I've been saying this for some time now, that the rockets that the Palestinian factions have are much better than they once were. They are much more advanced than they once were. And they've shown that today. Within a few minutes, just a few minutes ago, within 1 minute, the armed groups had fired over 100 rockets into Tel Aviv and other points and targeted military bases as well in the process of this, as well as, I believe, the Ben Gurion airport area too. These rockets have actually had a real impact this time, okay? And of course, the recent statistics are that 32 Palestinians in the Gaza Strip have been killed. This includes at least 11 children, and a elderly woman with a disability who was killed. And for those who have been following, you may have seen the videos of the massacres which have occurred during this time. Palestinians in the street have been bombarded in broad daylight. Now I'm going to stick with this point because this happened yesterday. And they've been bringing down residential buildings as well all throughout the day. And attacking buildings belonging to journalist companies, for instance, and residential neighborhoods have just been completely flattened. And I've seen the damage, and I've actually seen it live because I've been on video calls with friends. They've shown it to me out of their windows. Now, Israel, when it is striking, much of these munitions that it fires will have, for instance, it can show videos to those who are firing it, so they can actually see through cameras what they're hitting. Many of these munitions are so incredibly accurate and can be cancelled up until the last seconds, right before it hits. So just think about it, okay? Israel knows there's people in a packed neighborhood, and it drops a bomb killing 9 people. 9 civilians. There was no militants there, okay? Now this crosses back over to what's been happening today. The armed groups warned Israel that if they continue killing civilians, that they would respond with larger barrages of rockets and better rockets. And they've actually proven this now, that they do have better weapons and the ability to actually kill Israelis this time, okay? Israel didn't listen to that. Israel continued to escalate. It continued to escalate, and it was Israel's choice to do so. This whole escalation could have been avoided altogether if Israel chose to avoid it. And do you know why? Do you know why this escalation has occurred? Because of Benjamin Netanyahu supporting hardline settler groups, extremists, right, to the hilt. And what they were doing, not only the settlers, but the occupation forces at Masjid al-Aqsa, is that on Friday, they entered the site, and I don't care if a few people, even if the narrative is that's been presented by mainstream Western press and the Israeli press to an extent, is that there were Palestinians throwing stones, etc., at the Israelis. Oh, they were chanting things that we don't like. And so they entered the site with hundreds of forces, heavily armed forces. I don't care. I don't care whether that was the case, because then they went over and attacked people during prayer, during Ramadan, in the third holiest site in Islam. And they injured around 200 people. they did this the following night as well. And then again on Monday as well, what we saw was a massive escalation, 550 people injured in the site. And this has been described as clashes. Now, let me break down to you what these clashes were. We know the escalation on Friday night. We know what that was. We saw that on live streams, and you can go check the live streams and see what happened from the very, very start, okay? You can go and see exactly what's happened, and all the video evidence is out there, which the mainstream press will just ignore, right, and pretend like it doesn't exist, right? And their function, the function of these mainstream media outlets is literally to try and sow doubt and to provide misinformation, because the information is already out there. Everyone can see it, okay? So these clashes, what were the clashes? On one side, you have heavily armed, very well trained occupation police who are entering a holy site and attacking people in a holy site during Ramadan. Okay? That's what you've got on one side. And they're firing tear gas, rubber bullets, right? And they're smashing into people. On the other side, you have Palestinians on the site, extremely pissed off because of what's been happening to them and the scenes of what's been happening in the past days, if they weren't there the first day, of the occupation forces going in and smashing the windows of the mosque, going into the medical facility at the Al-Aqsa compound, and literally firing inside of it and blowing it to pieces. Okay? Then you have them stepping on Qurans inside of the site, disrespectfully going inside the mosques and trampling around with their shoes on. Okay? You're supposed to take your shoes off when you enter into a mosque. They know this. They know this very well. Okay? And on top of that, they're firing gas there. They're throwing down the shelves so that the books, most of them Qur'ans, are on the floor. Right? And attacking people. The other side, you got people pissed off throwing stones and whatever they can get their hands on. Now, is that as the so-called independent, right? Okay, the so-called independent. I'm not going to call it the independent because that's just ridiculous at this point. Describe this in a headline as 200 Palestinians injured in clashes with Israeli police at mosque. Well, that really gives you some context, doesn't it? I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. But I'm not just interested in this, I'm interested in the entirety of the situation, not just a few days. Because you cannot view what's happening right now in the context of a few days. And assalamu alaikum to everybody in here. I'm seeing that loads of people are saying this, and hi to everybody in here. If you are on here, please hit that like button. If you don't like the video, you don't have to watch the video. Okay, so we're gonna keep going forward. I care about the full context here and what's been happening, and also the context of what Palestinians are living. So let's just look at Jerusalem, and let's just look at the past month. 2 weeks ago, there was a settler march in Jerusalem which sought to go into the old city, and some of them did go into the old city and attack Palestinian homes, okay? And these settler extremists were chanting what? Death to Arabs. These were condemned even by the most pro-Israel figures in the United States, for instance, because they were openly fascist. They were described as a modern-day lynch mob, okay? This group is the group that wanted to go into Al-Aqsa Mosque on Monday, which was prevented, actually, by the Palestinian rocket fire. Okay, it didn't end up going on. And the Palestinian armed factions in Gaza prevented them from entering Masjid al-Aqsa. Okay? So that march was planned from all the way back then. We knew about it, and the Palestinian organizations had all declared that if this goes ahead, there's gonna be a reaction. There's gonna be a reaction. Honestly, someone says, love you from Syria. All my love to everyone too. Thank you very much for that. If you know the reaction is coming, you got 2 weeks to do something about it. These settlers, for instance, in the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah, many people may have heard of Sheikh Jarrah at the moment. Okay, someone said from a bomb shelter in Tel Aviv. You can thank Netanyahu for living in a bomb shelter at the moment, actually. There's an Israeli on here saying that they're in a bomb shelter. This is Netanyahu's fault that you're in a bomb shelter at the moment. Oh, and by the way, my friends and the people close to me, okay, don't have bomb shelters, all right? that don't have bomb shelters. And none of them are safe, okay? So if you're living in a bomb shelter, maybe open up your mind as to how this feels for people who don't have sirens or bomb shelters or air defenses whatsoever, okay? That's a point that needs to be made. In Sheikh Jarrah, anyway, let's go back to it. Netanyahu, right, not only has he backed these settlers and the Israeli court system, okay, has backed these hardline settlers, okay, in allowing and facilitating for the dispossession of Palestinian homes, the expulsion of Palestinians from their homes in Sheikh Jarrah, and we could go through the record very extensively, and I believe I've talked about it extensively on this channel and elsewhere, and I will do more in the future as well, because it is a very important case, and all of these, stupid arguments which are given to try and justify why these homes are being taken and the people are being kicked out on the road with no compensation, and are left essentially homeless, right? We could go through all of that, and we can go into the 1950 absentees property law, and we can go into all of the reports which show what was that was used for instance, in the recent report by Human Rights Watch, which accuses Israel of being an apartheid regime. It documents how that law was used, the same law that's being used for the people of Sheikh Jarrah and in other areas in East Jerusalem to dispossess houses, how that was used before, right? When it from its very inception to dispossess Palestinian land, okay? And there's no such law as well which allows Palestinians to claim land which was stolen from them, all right? So a double standard there, okay? In Sheikh Jarrah, the people not only are they subjected to their homes being taken away from them, right? They've been pushed out of their homes that they've been living in for their whole lives, told that this is not your home, this is the home of a settler now, okay? They have been harassed. The protests that were ongoing, people were beaten down by the occupation forces. Then who showed up to this? Who showed up to support the hardline racist settlers? Members of the government. Yeah. The allies of Netanyahu, Itamar Ben-Gvir, and Bezalel Smotrich. Okay, Itamar Ben-Gvir of the Otzma Yehudit, or the Jewish Power Party, okay, this guy was convicted of inciting racism in Israel itself by its own court system. All right? And he was there shouting racist things at Palestinians. Okay? And there's another guy that was standing around with him in Sheikh Jarrah saying that, a bullet should have hit a Palestinian's head and laughing about it. Okay? And that was on camera, he was okay saying that. Imagine what he was saying behind the scenes. Then you have Bezalel Smotrich, who heads up the religious Zionism slate or party. And this guy has argued for segregated maternity wards so that Jewish women don't have to give birth in the presence of Arabs. That's how racist these people are. And they're in Sheikh Jarrah specifically trying to stir up tensions. Okay? That's what they're doing. Netanyahu's allies with them. Before, they wouldn't even get near to the Israeli government. But now they're allies of Netanyahu. Because Netanyahu's undergoing a corruption trial, okay, for fraud, bribery, right? And all the different charges are placed against him, okay? And Netanyahu wants to hold on to his political power. Netanyahu now wants to go to a fifth round of Israeli elections. And he doesn't want Yair Lapid to his opposition, the opposition bloc, to form a coalition at all. He does not want that to happen. So what does he do? He backs the settlers because he doesn't want to lose the settlers or the extremists, right? Okay, he backs them, okay. He backs these people, and he backs a march which he knows is going to exacerbate tensions. He allows for those forces to go in there into Al-Aqsa Mosque knowing the sensitivity, right? And absolutely nothing. Okay, the warnings came, and the warnings came, and the warnings came about a reaction. People were rising up in the West Bank. They were rising up in Jerusalem. They were rising up, Palestinians inside of Israel themselves. Now this has got to an extreme case, today specifically, okay? Where some Israeli political figures have even described it as a civil war. The uprising of Palestinians with Israeli citizenships living in what is now Israel. Okay? So, This is the situation that you had. And then on top of that, what you have to understand is that there is an ongoing occupation, right, since 1967 of East Jerusalem and the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip is under an illegal siege. The people inside of Israel itself, in terms of the Palestinian population, are also discriminated against. And look, what I'm saying, and when I'm using the term apartheid and discrimination, right? These are not just words that I just came up with, and it's not hyperbole, okay? And I want to make a point of making sure people know that this is not just hyperbole, all right? These are the words which have been used to describe the situation by the top human rights organizations, okay? That's what has been said by Israel's top human rights organization, all right? That's those terms. That's where they're coming from. All right? Okay? So, if we're, and somebody said in here, oh, only B'Tselem. No, 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 no. There's multiple Israeli rights groups which have accused Israel of apartheid. And one of them issued a legal opinion on apartheid in the West Bank last year as well. So, we can get into that, but many Israeli rights organizations agree with this. So, and I think it's important to address these points as they come up. I see them in a little comment section, and I can address them for people. So we have this. We have this situation where the Palestinians are living hell, okay? And they're tired of it. And they see the holy site attacked. And they see the dispossession, right? And the armed groups have warned. And Netanyahu has aligned himself with the settlers and is going to back them to the hilt, even against the advice of the Shin Bet. Okay? The Israeli intelligence. They're saying, what you're doing is not such a good idea, you know? It's not really gonna have the best results that you want. Okay? Still doesn't care, alright? So, that's the situation you had, right? And like I said before, okay, 32 Palestinians killed. We saw a massacre of 9 people yesterday. And now I'm going to get into what's been happening in terms of the Palestinian response and the uprising. Palestinians throughout what is Israeli territory, right? Israeli-held territory, have been rising up, right? Right now, there's a state of emergency declared in Lod, right? We've seen this all over in the Negev even, the occupied Nakab, right? So in the Negev, people are rising up, right? All over they're rising up. And these are areas which we've never seen stuff before, okay? We've never seen this sort of action before. And they're rising up. And they're fighting Israelis. And they're actually even, some of these people are going to such extremes that they're using weapons, right? And they're firing at Israeli forces and clearing them out and making them run away out of their neighborhoods. Of course, a Palestinian was killed yesterday by a settler as well, which did not help things, okay, and exacerbated tensions. And tonight, after all this violence, okay, Israeli forces go into Masjid al-Aqsa again, and they attack it again. After all this violence, they still want to go in there and attack people. Okay, now the rockets. Okay, Israel got warned. It was warned time and time and time again. It knew that. It took the decision that it would have to bear the brunt of them. Okay? A few things about what Israel's done as well. Israel has demonstrated that the only time that it can hit anyone of any importance is people in their houses who are part of a said group, or people on an active site, which is very, very obviously a military site, and hit them there. Okay? Otherwise, what do? They destroy residential buildings with these very precise munitions. Okay? Their intelligence is garbage. Or, and it could be a mixture of both, or what is the case is that they mean to target civilians. Okay? And if we look at the massacre which occurred yesterday of innocent civilians, which none of them were militants, okay? None of them were holding guns. None of them were firing rockets, okay? that was an obvious massacre of civilians, and they targeted civilians. Okay? Now, the rockets, hundreds upon hundreds of rockets, and you'll see that in the cases of these rockets being fired, again, Israel makes that decision to allow those rockets to be fired. Okay? So, for instance, earlier on today, the armed factions in Gaza said to Israel, they put out a statement and they said, if you continue to target residential buildings, we will fire into Tel Aviv and it will be the hardest blow that you've ever faced. Okay? What does Israel do? Israel brings down an entire 13-story building, residential building. You've literally just begged for it to happen. Okay? Israel begged for that to happen. So then 130 rockets fired into Tel Aviv, and actually I believe the death toll of Israelis at the moment, which is unprecedented. This has never happened, especially not in one day from the rockets, okay? Because the rockets used to be fireworks, okay? The rockets used to have no charge, they couldn't hit anything, they had no direction, it was literally like, fireworks. It was a display. They killed 8 people today. That's according to some statistics. Some statistics have a lower and higher, and there's all different reporting on it, right? And they've injured many more as well. And the armed groups as well, okay, the armed groups as well actually targeted Israeli forces with drones today as well, the occupation forces, all right, so the military forces. And they've hit military bases too, as well, targeted military bases, hit an oil refinery, and they've made Israel pay a price because Israel goes and bombs civilian infrastructure and kills civilians. And we literally have a situation now like Hezbollah had made in 2006 in terms of the rockets. Okay, if you hit this, then we're going to fire back. And there's a response for everything Israel does. And even if Israel kills way more, there's a response which Israel has paid a price in. Okay? That has been changed significantly. Before, that was never the case. And I was arguing to people for a long time that since November of 2018, the entire situation between Gaza and Israel had changed dramatically. Now we can get into the whole issue, right, of responsibility and all the rest of that. I've explained Netanyahu's point here, okay? I've explained why the Palestinians are angry, okay? Now I want to talk about the international community. If a criminal, right, on the street, someone's committing a criminal action domestically in the domestic sense or case, that you have 2 points of action, all right, against that person, that entity, that company, or that country, okay, in order to stop it from, or this person from doing the illegal action. You can give them a fine, you can hit them economically, right? Or you can physically incarcerate them or hit them militarily. Okay? These are the 2 main ways to do it. When someone will not change their mind, okay? When someone is committing crimes and they just continue doing it, right? This is why we have a legal system here, for instance, in most countries, all right? Every country has a legal system because you have to put something in place so that if things that are immoral are committed, there is a response so that it deters people and it also punishes those that do that. So the international community talks, and it talks, and it talks. Oh, and it talks some more, okay? And then the international community goes, Israel's violating international law. Israel's violating international law. UN resolution, UN resolution, UN resolution, UN resolution, UN resolution, UN resolution, okay? And then the human rights reports come out, right? And the condemnation comes. And we see this constantly all day, every day. And what follows this? That's right, nothing. Nothing. Nothing follows it. Nothing. Okay? So this is like, the international community is doing this right now, okay? The international community is like the police. Just imagine in a domestic sense. There's a guy who's going around and he's killing people, right? He's just wholesale, just gunning people down, stealing stuff from stores, right? And the police are going, "You're a very bad guy. You're a very bad guy. You should really stop. Do you think you should stop? You should really stop." And he kills more and he steals more. "You should really stop. You should really stop. You know you're doing the wrong thing." But they don't arrest him. They don't even give him a fine. Okay? All right? If you don't act against someone who's doing a criminal action, right, or violating laws which have been implemented in an international legal system, okay, if you don't act against them, then why would they listen to you? They're living their best life. They're doing whatever they want. They're not going to listen to you. They're getting away with what they're doing, and they're living how they want to live. Okay? Why would they listen to you? The international community has done nothing. Nothing for this issue. Nothing. Okay? They've sat by. Now, let's look at the second point of response. The Palestinian people, who have been time and time again massacred. Let's go back to the last massacre that occurred in 2018 with the Great Return March, where unarmed demonstrators, men, women, children, the elderly, disabled people, journalists, nurses, were just gunned down in cold blood for absolutely no reason but going to a fence and demonstrating. Okay? That in of itself, we could go back for the massive record, right? And it would take hours, maybe days, to go through this record. Okay? But ultimately, it got away with that sort of stuff. And so the Palestinians suffering these massacres, suffering under these this apartheid military law, right? Suffering constantly and then being attacked. Their whole religion, many of these people are Muslim, some of them are Christian. And by the way, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, people were trying to get in, and the Israeli forces jumped the barricades and started punching people in the face. If you don't listen to my regulations, like I put this in place, you can't come in. If you don't listen to me, I'm going to jump over and punch you in the face, right? And this was during Orthodox Easter. So this happens to Christians too, right? All Palestinians get affected. It doesn't matter their religion. It's not a religious thing. But if you do attack somebody's beliefs and you attack their holy site and attack worshippers during prayer, this is a reaction that you get. You get that reaction, right? An angry reaction. And if the people don't really have the best weaponry, okay, they're just going to fight back with whatever they have. And they've done that for a long time. And it used to be that Israel dictated the terms on which all points of contact with the Palestinians happened. It's not the case this time. In fact, the Palestinians had a say in this. The Palestinians are able to respond now because they have better weapons technology. So Israel has to recalculate. And instead of it just being Gaza and the whole world just sort of looks on for the media as Gaza is being pummeled and its civilian population is being massacred, the mowing of the lawn, this time, all the Palestinians are together. All of them. This is the result of decades upon decades, right? Of persecution, of massacres, of the dispossession of homes, of an apartheid system. That's what this is the product of, right? Netanyahu has got himself into this situation because of who he has aligned himself with. He knew that there will be a reaction and a consequence, and he put Israel in that position. The military has been warned time and time again. Stop targeting our civilians. Stop targeting our civilian infrastructure. Get out of Al-Aqsa and stop attacking our people at Al-Aqsa, or else we will respond if you do any of these things, which are, of course, crimes and immoral. Okay? And Israel goes, oh, what happened? Well, you got warned that if you do these things, but the thing is now that Hamas and the other organizations in the Gaza Strip, they have real weapons. So in the past, they would threaten and they'd fire these, pipe metal fireworks up into the sky and they'd do nothing. And then Israel would be like, it's all right. It's not too bad. And there's no people in the other territories really doing much, okay? Not much trouble. So they were like, you know, normally this is what happens, okay? And so this time, it's every single area where Palestinians exist inside of the country, from the river to the sea, okay? Every single area, they're rising up, all of them. And many of them are actively attacking Israeli forces and are coming out to confront settlers, are coming out to confront Israelis who are in the streets, having fights, gunfights, okay, everywhere. Okay? Israel triggered this. It had warnings. But now the Israeli regime reacts, right? It reacts as if it didn't have a warning. How can these Arabs be doing this to us? We just normally get away with killing their children, bombing their residential areas. Well, if you do that, you're gonna have a response. That's just what happens. It's obvious. When you're the power in the situation, when you're the one with one of the most well-equipped, well-developed, well-trained militaries on the planet, right? And you say that you're a part of the West, in many senses, right? And you claim to be a democracy and all of these things, and you claim that you care about human rights, and then you behave like this, and then you get shocked when there's a reaction. It's just like, I can't understand how this has been calculated this way. Like, the leadership is so incredibly divided, and Netanyahu has got himself into the situation where I don't think the Israeli leadership like exactly anticipated what's happening right now, unless they can somehow take advantage of it. But I don't think they had in mind what is happening now, because this is the thing in Israeli politics for years. The Palestinian issue is not an issue really. It's a side issue. It's sort of something that they've pushed to the side and just gone, oh yeah, it's sort of annoying. Gaza, sometimes it makes problems and people in the south get annoyed, but it's not a main issue. And they just ignore what's happening 30 minutes away from them. People with no electricity, people with no clean drinking water. In the case of Gaza, 97% of the drinking water is unfit for human consumption. The top scholar on Gaza's economy, Sarah Roy, has pretty much said, right, and I'm paraphrasing, that 1 million children in Gaza are being poisoned by the water that they're drinking. Okay? So, basically, what Israel has done has led to this. And it's obvious. It's obvious if you look at the facts, if you look at what's going on, you look at Netanyahu, the pressure that he's under, and what he backed. He created a monster. Now he's paying the price. And I was trying to tell people this for weeks. I was saying, look, it's heading towards this, it's heading towards this. And many people told me, no, 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 that's not the case. No, they're not going to do this, and this is not going to happen. Trust me, there's not going to be an explosion of violence. Trust me, no, no, no. Lots of people actually told me this. And then a lot of people rang me up afterwards and went, oh, yeah, we were wrong. Because it's blindingly obvious when you see it all together that this was going to happen. So maybe this is going to be taken advantage of somehow, okay, by the Israeli political elite. But I think they have a real trouble on their hands at the moment with what's going on. I truly do believe that they're in trouble. They're in trouble. There's an ICC, International Criminal Court, investigation into Israeli war crimes, Palestinian war crimes too, but of course Palestinians accept it and the Israelis reject it. But that's pending. We want to know what they're actually going to investigate specifically now. Then you have the Human Rights Watch report, and you have the B'Tselem report. Okay, and you have international condemnation, and the idea of Israel being an apartheid regime is gaining more and more credibility in the international community, right? And so with a situation exploding like this, where you have physical force on the ground really actually pushing back against you, then you have a criminal investigation ongoing, okay, which is a PR catastrophe, right? And no doubt more people are going to start to boycott, right? So you got that too. They're in trouble. they're in trouble. And they've chosen to escalate this. And they've got themselves into this situation. This was an Israeli government decision. Okay? An Israeli government decision. And now they'll cry about Tel Aviv being hit. For the first time, really, with real rockets. Okay? Real rockets. I do mean that, these did have impact. You can watch the videos for yourself. Okay? So after all these years, they actually got munitions which can work. And Israel is finally feeling what it's like to live next to a besieged territory, which consists one of the most densely populated areas on Earth, which consists of a population which is living in hell. They're finally that's starting to rub off on them. That they have created hell next door and the fire's burning them. That's what's happening now. Okay? So what's happening here, right, with this situation is these rockets, okay, will continue. I believe there was talk of an Israeli military vehicle just targeted. I can't confirm that for anyone, right? But the amount of Israeli casualties this time, within like just over a day, this is unprecedented. It's never happened like this. There's never been this level of destruction from the rockets. Odd house or so was affected here and there by these, half rockets that they had manufactured in the past. But, they didn't do this sort of damage. Okay? And most of these rockets that are fired are not actually doing damage. Okay? Most of them, because you can't direct them exactly in areas. But, the more advanced ones are hitting areas. And this is a real problem for Israel. So this, in my opinion, right now, I mean, if it continues, then it's a continuation of it. But this is an intifada. The situation right now, if this maintains, this is intifada. That's what it is. And it looks like it's going to continue. And if it doesn't die down, then yeah, there's going to be a real problem for Israel maintaining the policies that it does. And you might notice that the United States has been pretty silent. Now, the United States will back Israel and say that it has the right to self-defense, and that Palestinians essentially don't have the right to self-defense, right? Because that's what happens when you prop up your apartheid regime, and it's just racism at the end of the day. That's what it is. It's this mentality that they have that Palestinians aren't human beings, essentially, right? They don't have the right to self-defense, okay? And this situation that we have right now, where is it going? Perhaps a war on the Gaza Strip? Perhaps this is a full-blown intifada? Perhaps both. And I would say let's say if the situation calms down, it's at least going to take about a week or so to calm down, I'd say. At this point, looking at it, at least a week. But there's changes in the mood. There's changes in the situation that's been set up. Red lines have been changed. Everything is different now. And this is a very significant event. Okay? And again, let's go back to it. The international community not doing anything. They're not doing a thing, not lifting a finger, not actually bringing down any pressure on Israel, has led to this. Because people who have their backs against the wall, will fight back with whatever they can.